So let's start. Thank you so very much, both of you, for joining. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our climate podcast. I'm your host, Danish Butul Zedi from Community World Service Asia. Today, we are talking about a big question. How is the aid world responding to the climate crisis and the climate change? To help me answer this, I have two special guests with me. First, we have Nishanie Jayamaha. Nishani has worked in the humanitarian sector for over 20 years. She has worked with the UN and other NGOs and at the policy level. She started her career in Sri Lanka after tsunami. She knows what happens on the ground during a disaster, and she also knows how global decisions are made. So, welcome, Nishani, to the podcast.
Thanks so much. So excited to be here, Danish, and to really share experiences and also learn from each other, right? Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Nishani. Thank you, Nishani. So we have also Shumaila Murtaza. Shumaila works in Pakistan with the Foundation of Rural Development. She has over 17 years of work experience in different organizations. She has been working on gender and climate issues. She used to be a radio journalist, so she's really good at listening to the communities and making sure their voices are being heard. And FRD is a partner organization of Climate and Environment Charter in Pakistan also. Welcome, Shumaila, to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Danish, for inviting me. I really appreciate the opportunity to share our experiences. Thank you.
Okay, so let's formally open our discussion. So let's start with Nishani and let's start with the basic discussion. Like many of our organizations and our listeners, they have heard about the Climate and Environment Charter, but they might not know what actually it is about. Can you just give us a simple overview? What are the charter and what are the main commitments of the charter? So over to Nishani.
Sure, thanks. So maybe a little background would be great to start with. So in late 2019, there was a recognition that humanitarian organizations were responding to more and more impacts of climate change and displacement, and even more than conflict, actually. So we were seeing more droughts, desertification, on top of that, conflict, food insecurity, hunger. Uh, Erratic and unpredictable weather patterns impacting the communities we were working with, right? So, but the sector was not prepared or ready to support the communities to face these increasing impacts. And as a result, the ICRC, IFRC, and ICVA, International Council of Voluntary Agencies, consulted UN agencies, academia, think tanks, NGOs in the sector to aim for something like what should we be doing? Where should we go as a sector and how do we plan this? So the charter came about as a way or a framework to guide organizations who are working in the humanitarian sector to take into account climate and environmental action in a more systematic manner. So the charter was launched in May 2021. It's been a while now. And to date, we have signatures of over 500 organizations ranging from NGOs to Red Cross, Red Crescent, national societies, UN agencies, academia, and think tanks. And the majority are local, national, and regionally based organizations. So, really proud to have more local, national organizations joining the charter. And we have about 14 member states and EU supporters to the charter as well.
Very
And
nice.
the Charter Secretariat was set up 2 years ago in May 2024 to support signatories to implement the commitments.
That's very
Shall I get
nice.
sorry,
Yeah.
shall I get into the commitments a little bit? A quick
Of
overview.
course, please go ahead. Yeah.
Great. So the charter consists of 7 commitments and acts as a framework, as I mentioned. The first 2 commitments are what we need to do, and the next 4 commitments is how should we be doing this. And the seventh commitment talks about mutual accountability. So the first 2 commitments act as a backbone to the charter. The first commitment talks about how do we support to communities to actually build their resilience to face increasing impacts of climate change, and how do we as organizations support them to be able to face these increasing impacts. And the second commitment looks at the flip side of the coin, if you would call it, is what is our environmental footprint, and how are we as organizations not doing more harm in the areas we're working with and to the communities we're working with, and looking at more environmental sustainability of the work we do. And the four commitments, that is how to achieve our ambitions, range from embracing local leadership, indigenous and local knowledge, and look at that how are we looking at taking into account climate and environmental risk in our programming so that we're prepared and fit for purpose, and how do we leverage our influence and nurture collective and collaborative action, noting that we cannot do this alone as a humanitarian sector. And the seventh commitment is about collective accountability. So the charter is not a binding document, it's voluntary, but we're asking how can organizations set targets to the commitment so that they can actually achieve these goals and objectives. Over to you,
Very
Danish.
nice. Very nice. Thank you so much. And I can see that the charter framework is really helpful. It actually moves from big ideas to the practical action. Thank you so much for sharing about the commitments, the seven commitments. Those are very, very practical. So Shumaila, I would now like to hear from you that how practical actions actually look like in a country like Pakistan. So if you just share like one or two specific example that how your organization has applied the charter's principle on the ground and what did that look like in practice and what was the outcome. Thank you.
Danish, first of all, apologies for my voice tone today. Foundation for Rural Development is a Pakistani humanitarian and development organization working mainly in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. Our work focuses on climate adaptation, disaster risk reduction, livelihoods, and climate-led development. At its core, our focus is simple: helping communities become resilient, more self reliant, and better prepared for future challenges. At FRD, the Climate Charter is not something we signed and moved on from. It's it's something, uh, it guides how we work every day. In Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, most of the people we work with are small farmers. For them, a climate change is not a distant issue, it is already affecting their lives. Rainfall is decreasing, water shortages are becoming common, the weather is unpredictable, and soil quality is declining. This is what they face each season. And that's why we don't enter communities with ready made solutions. We begin by sitting with people and listening. We ask what changes they are seeing and what challenges they are facing. Then, together, we introduce climate smart practices such as water saving irrigation, tunnel farming, soil conservation, and restoring degraded land. These are practical steps. They protect crops and also protect the natural resources farmers depend on. Women play a key role in this work. They are already active in farming and food production, but they are often excluded from training and decision making. We make sure they are included from the beginning, but they build skills, manage resources, and in many cases, take leadership roles. We also encourage young people to contribute new ideas. Their energy and creativity are important, and strong local leadership is essential for lasting change. At the community level, we also raise about protecting trees, especially in areas where fuel wood is widely used. We promote solar solutions and energy efficient stores. So families can reduce pressure on forest and improve safety at home. These are practical actions that protect both livelihoods and the environment. At the same time, we reflect on our own practices as an organization. We have reduced paper use, shifted the digital reporting systems, and encourage virtual meetings when possible to reduce travel. We monitor how we use resources like electricity and fuel and try to minimize unnecessary consumption. We also use TV and radio to share climate information in simple language. We talk about weather patterns, farming advice, and preparedness. Information that people can actually use in their daily lives. So for us, the climate charter is not one big action.
Yeah.
It is a series of consistent practical steps in the field, in our systems, and in how we communicate. And gradually, we see the impact. The communities become more confident, better informed, and better prepared. Thank you.
Shumaila, thank you so much for the very comprehensive answer, and I can actually see that how the practical implementation is being taken place in terms of charter principles, in terms of understanding, and in terms of building more resilient communities towards climate change. So, Nishani, we often talk about the gap between emergency response and the long-term development. So this is very important to know from your perspective. How does the charter help organizations to bridge this small and short-term humanitarian response with longer-term climate action? We usually see that there are a lot of happening, this emergency response, and then organizations are coming and then they are going. So how we can bridge this gap to anticipate long-term climate impact and action in your opinion?
Yeah, I think one of the things I'd like to maybe highlight right now is that, the humanitarian sector is going through a huge overhaul, if you would call it, with the funding cuts and the reset is looking at actually going back to basics, right? Danish and Shumaila, I don't know if you
Yeah.
remember, but when I was, when I started in humanitarian action 20 years ago, this was what was happening, very life-saving needs and life-saving actions. And we evolved, but now we're feeling like we're going backwards, right? So one of the things, and I think it's good to set a bit of the stage, is like 85% of our charter signatories who took our survey last May shared that their operations have been constrained or disrupted. And over 40% indicated that increased uncertainty and their ability to continue climate and environment programming was just, it was increasing basically, right? So there is an opportunity here, and this is where the interaction between looking at that short-term humanitarian action and that long-term work that we need to build in is crucial, because we are now investing in communities to be resilient. And the more we support these communities, we actually reduce these humanitarian needs over time by lessening the crisis impacts, supporting a faster recovery, and then creating benefits, right, for communities and economies. I don't need to preach this. I think both of you are very well aware. So, what we see is like FRD, we know that charter signatories are already working on climate and environment action in their programming, right? Like you mentioned, Shumaila.
Yeah.
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 Of
Hmm.
course,
So
of course.
exactly. So, but what we see is that a lot of this is sometimes project based or happening in some programs and not all programs. So, there is this opportunity to mainstream and integrate climate and environment action across humanitarian programming, even in small actions and even in the short term. So, take climate and environmental risk assessment, for example, right? If any program we start, be it a short term intervention or a humanitarian action, that you're coming into a particular village or a community because they had a flood or an earthquake, for example, right? And if you take into account that climate risks there in that area and the environmental risks, which is looking at then what is the environment impact of putting a camp in a particular area by cutting down forest, because that's the only location to put it. If we take this
Yeah.
into account already from the start in our designing of this program and the project that we're starting, or the interventions that we're starting, you're already taking a huge leap for long-term action, right? Because that means we will better understand the climate risks and the environment risk of the program, and say look at recurrent floods or heat waves or the droughts that are going to take place there, which means then we need to adjust a program so that we're mitigating in terms of, what is the livelihood intervention we're providing? You mentioned, Shumaila, farming, right? The interventions we're giving them. Is it drought resistant seed if it's in a drought area? Are we giving them, seeds or plants that are not actually very conducive to that location in the future or even in that short term, right? Because it might be a drought season that we're coming to. And then that also helps our financial planning because then we are prepared for that. And then the community benefits, and so does the organization. So, this is that long term, the short term, long term that we really need to take into account. And so, what does the charter bring to the signatories is that we actually share these lessons learned. And Shumaila, FRD has shared so many amazing experiences with our charter signatories in our webinars, in our workshops, in events, that this sort of peer-to-peer exchange of what works and what doesn't work, that is really important. We love to talk about good practice, best practice, what went well, but actually we learn more from what didn't go well, right? We all learn from our mistakes. I hope so.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
that sort of yeah, that sort of learning is really important.
yeah,
And the charter brings this sort of peer-to-peer exchange together and learning together. And
yeah,
also not to duplicate, because there's a lot of tools, guidance,
yes,
resources out there. But we're duplicating, we're trying to make a new tool and a new
yeah,
guidance or a new
mm,
policy when it's
yes,
existing. What we do, we should be doing, and that is what we support our organizations, is to take that and then
yeah,
revise it and tweak it to fit for purpose to where you're working and your
yes.
context. Yeah.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much for the very detailed answer. And it was very interesting to know that it sounds like that these all interventions required a major mindset shift. But shifting a mindset is really hard. And I really appreciate the role of charter and the organizations that you are going parallel, learning and relearning from your experiences and doing something really practical for the organization that is not actually the duplication. And it's indeed a value addition to the work in the climate adaptation and climate change. So, Shumaila, from your perspective as a signatory, what kind of support, whether from the Secretariat, partners, or other networks, has been most useful in turning commitment to the action? So I want you to briefly answer me about these questions because a lot of people, as Nishani mentioned, they usually talk about a lot of knowledge sharing, lot of resources available, but how wise one could be to choose with the most sensible one. Thank you.
Okay, that's a great question. What I appreciate about the climate charter is that it's practical. It doesn't expect organizations like our to transform overnight. It encourages a steady improvement. At FRD, we were already integrating climate change thinking into our humanitarian development work. The charter helped us connect everything more clearly. It made climate responsibility part of all our programming, not something separate. Peer learning has also been very valuable. We learn from other organizations what tools they use, how they measure progress, and how they manage limited resources. That exchange is honest and practical. Being part of this community also strengthens accountability. It reminds us that climate responsibility is shared, and shared responsibility is what turns commitment into real action.
Okay, thank you
Yeah.
so much for the very brief answer. Nishani, following up on that, what practical support does the Secretariat usually offer? And I can imagine a big concern for the smaller NGOs is the reporting burden. And also for you to, go ahead with the monitoring and evaluation perspective. So how do you help measure progress without burdening the small organizations and organizations who want to learn something practical from the charter?
Yeah, so we've got quite a lot of support functions, as I mentioned earlier, and I hope you can share the tools and the guidance and resource page that we have with the signature with everybody who is on the podcast and who's joining us.
Yes.
And this sort of, I think, what, as mentioned by Shumaila, this practical action is really useful, right? And what we realized that organizations said was that A, a lot of resources out there, and it's in all different sorts of places, right? Have to go, if you want to look at nature-based solutions, you have to go somewhere else. If you want to find something on logistics, you have to go somewhere else. If you want to find something on climate adaptation, there are about 10 places that you can go find it. So what we did was, to help as a service to signatories, was to actually curate what are some of these tools, resources, guidance, etc., out there, and start off as, okay, for an organization that's only starting now to look at their climate and environmental integration or actions in humanitarian programming, this is 101. Here's where you start to do this. And then if you're already at a bit of a level that we're already gone from 101, here's some more tools and guidance that you can use to take into account if you're looking at adaptation, for climate adaptation, for example. What are some of the best practice? What can you, here are some case studies. And case studies are also useful because they inspire, right? What others are doing, and oh, we can do this in our context. We might have to do some changes to it, but it works. So this sort of tools and guidance and curating this and having this one-stop shop was one thing we heard from the signatories, and we decided this was something that we will focus on. So we've got quite a few tools and guidance on the page. We hope you can use it, and it'll be useful. And then when it comes to reporting and measuring progress, what we say and what we tell organizations is that you're already doing this. You already have a monitoring evaluation cycle, and you have this in
Of
your
course.
programming. Otherwise,
Yeah.
how are you going to, how are you going to measure your progress, and how are you going to report back to you, either your donors and mostly to your communities, right? You have a feedback loop with your communities. Is what we're doing working for you? What do you need more? What do you need better? How can we, changing these interventions? And so what we actually have worked with organizations is to say, look at already existing mechanisms that you have in your organizations for this kind of measuring progress and feedback loops and reporting. So it's not an additional burden, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not another report that you have to do, but
Mm.
it's already then mainstreaming it into your existing program, which you're already reporting on. So this sort of
Yes.
way of working, supports an organization, and to be much more holistic about your measuring progress as well then.
Yes. Thank you, Nishani, for the very good and detailed answer. And I think that our listeners can easily figure it out. Like, this is a process that can help organization in building to their mainstream program. Thank you so much. So, Shumaila, over to you now. So, you're working in a region that is on the front lines of climate change, and we just had example of earthquake here. So, based on your work in Pakistan, if you could just give us one example, that one key policy or regulatory change that would make the organization's job more easier and help them to advance their goals from the charter. So, how they can adopt the learnings from the charter based on your work experiences. So, I want you to just answer me on this briefly. Thank you.
Well, this is something we reflect on quite often. In Pakistan, humanitarian response, climate adaptation, and disaster risk reduction often operate in separate systems. But communities don't experience crisis separately. Floods affect food security, environmental damage affects livelihoods, energy shortages affect safety and health. Local organizations are already working in integrated ways, but policies and coordination system don't always support that approach.
Yeah.
If national and provincial systems encourage integrated and planning and community-led actions, it would make a real difference. We could respond to immediate needs while also strengthening long-term resilience at the same time.
All right. Thank you so much for the very good and brief answer. So, Nishani, like for an organizations and for our listeners and for the people who are like listening to us at the moment. So, what if they are interested in joining the Secretariat and the Charter commitments? What are the steps to become a member of Climate and Environment Charter, and what criteria must they meet? This is very important. So, how do you answer this?
We're not super, we're not like we have a multiple levels of criteria. We have just few criteria. One is that you are actually a organization that is responding to humanitarian work and doing humanitarian work on the ground, because this particular charter is for humanitarian organizations, right? So that you are actually practicing this humanitarian action on the ground. And then
Yeah.
that you have a leadership that is committed, and when you sign the charter as an organization, that the leadership agrees we are going to actually look at these commitments and take look at setting targets to the charter from 1 year on of the charter being signed by the organization. So they're not big criteria, really.
Mm.
Very simple criteria that you're working in the sector. You as a leader who is signing the charter as an organization is going to really take this seriously and take into consideration these commitments and set targets and goals that you're and objectives that you're going to actually make these commitments into action. And
Yes.
you can sign the charter on the website. I think you're going to share these links. And
Yeah,
there's also a
definitely.
frequent yeah, and there's a frequently asked questions page that you can check more information on as well. So that's
Yeah.
it.
Okay, thank you so much for the very good answer, Nishani. So, before we wrap up, I want both of you to leave our audience with something to hold on to. If you could just give one key message about the role of humanitarian organization in the climate critical decade, what it would be. So I would not say it's a critical decade. It must be a transition phase that we all are learning and we are turning more into the practical solutions. So Nishani, let's start with you and then Shumala, I want you to answer this. One key message.
Oof, that's asking a lot, but okay. We are humanitarian organizations. Our main focus is to save lives, right? And the climate crisis is already here. It's not next year, it's not in 10 years even. It's
Yeah,
already here. We're facing this.
yeah,
So, if we want to be effective, efficient, and fit for purpose to face increasing impacts, which is also a risk multiplier,
yeah.
organizations, humanitarian organizations, we have a huge role to play to take into account in our programming today, right now. It's not tomorrow, it's not in 10 years. We need to start this now. So take into account climate and environment action in your humanitarian programming so that we're already strengthening not only community resilience, but our resilience to help communities, right?
All
And we have
right.
only one planet. So let's,
Yes, yes. Let's
let's,
save our planet Earth. Thank you, Nishani, for a very,
exactly.
very good message that really touched my heart. So over to Shumaila now.
I think this is an important point to end on. As humanitarian organizations, we influence more than we sometimes realize. Our decisions shape the future, how we design projects, how we use resources, how we involve communities, how we protect nature. We cannot separate saving lives today from protecting tomorrow. Small, consistent actions matter, especially when communities are leading the process. That's when resilience becomes meaningful and sustainable. So,
Okay.
and once again, thank you so much for creating space for this conversation for us. Thank you.
We will keep engaging you. No worries. Thank you so much. And in the end, I would like to thank you both for such an insightful conversation. And it is very much clear that climate crisis is not a distant threat. It's reshaping humanitarians' needs right now, as Nishani mentioned. So the charter provides a shared pathway, but as we have heard today, its strength comes from the collective action. We all should believe in collective action because not only charter or the organization can solely perform and take action. So whether your organization is ready to sign or just start learning, the most important step is the next one. So we all encourage you to visit Climate Charter website and explore the resources and QR codes shown on our website on the end of this climate podcast, and help us to join this growing community committed to building a more resilient and more responsible humanitarian sector towards climate adaptation. So I'm Danish Batul Zedi, and I'm signing off from our first climate podcast. And I'll see you next time with some new host and with some new topic. Thank you so much, and keep following our website page.
Bye.